Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending on where in the world you are coming to us from today. I'm Janine Scott, and I am the chairman of the Constituency for Africa. And thank you all for taking time from your schedules to join us for our Ronald H. Brown series on African affairs, the session on trade and investment. Every year in September, the Constituency for Africa hosts the Ron Brown series. The series is aptly named after the Honorable Ronald H. Brown, who served as the U.S. Secretary of Commerce under President Bill Clinton. He was the first African American to occupy this cabinet level position, and unfortunately he died in a tragic plane crash in 1996, some 25 years ago, while leading a mission to Croatia. CFA named the series after Ron Brown to celebrate his rich legacy, which in many ways shaped and continues to shape U.S.-Africa trade and investment relations till today. In honor of Secretary Brown's legacy, the overall theme this year of the Ron Brown series is encouraging diversity in international affairs. Secretary Brown was well known for promoting diversity and youth in U.S. business and government activities at home and abroad. Indeed, it is said that he was the first Secretary of Commerce to focus on U.S. trade and investment with Africa, and he is credited with having coined the phrase, Africa Matters. In this spirit today, we will focus on increasing diaspora trade and investment in Africa. We will hear perspectives from our first set of speakers who had the privilege to have known and worked with Secretary Brown in what we're calling reflections on Ron Brown's influence on doing business in Africa. Our second panel will carry that theme forward to today, reflecting specifically on strategies for increasing diaspora trade and investment with the African continent. Africa's role in global commerce continues to grow, and we want to ensure that the global African diaspora, likewise, can exercise a role in shaping and participating in this growth. We've assembled a stellar cast of speakers and panelists this morning, and I am certain that you'll be edified by their expertise, their remarks, and the quality of the discussions. With that, let me introduce the moderator of our first panel so that we can get things started. She is my sister and my friend, the Honorable Lori Fitzbagato. Lori served as a civil servant with Voice of America, a foreign service officer in the Dominican Republic and Mexico, and as a presidential appointee confirmed by the Senate in the Department of Commerce. Lori was under the Clinton administration, Lori was the Assistant Secretary of Commerce. She was the Assistant Secretary of Commerce, the Director General of the Foreign Commercial Service under the leadership of Secretary Brown, Acting Secretary Mickey Cantor, and Secretary William Daley. She managed foreign service offices. Oh, sorry, why is this doing this? She managed foreign service. She managed foreign service officers. I turned it. Sorry. She managed foreign service officers and promoted U.S. exports, advocated for U.S. companies competing for market share globally, and supported commercial diplomacy in 90 offices in the U.S. and 130 around the world. She was an advisor to the Democratic National Committee, Chairman Ron Brown, and she was also Director for Public Liaison on the presidential inaugural campaign for the 42nd president. Lori has served as Vice President of Iridium, which was a groundbreaking global satellite telephony company that was created by Motorola. She's counseled corporations, individuals, associations, and nonprofits on crisis issues, branding, image, building, foreign direct investment, and more. She was a partner at the Livingston Group and an executive with Hill & Knowlton. Currently, she supports and advises creative artists and institutions engaged in social justice, institutional stability, economic development, and community inclusion. She has just published her memoir called Dancing in the Dash, My Story of Empowerment, Diplomacy, and Resilience. It was released this month, in fact, in September 21. She's a Phi Beta Kappa of my alma mater, Vassar College, and she also has a master's degree from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Lori, I will turn the panel over to you, and thank you again for being here with us this morning.
Thank you so much, Janine. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'd like to applaud CFA for organizing this very important conference and for their tribute today to Ronald H. Brown. This is the 25th anniversary of his death and that of 34 others in the plane crash in Croatia, April 3rd, 1996. So it's my pleasure. I will simply say that I met Ron Brown in 1982. We worked together over that period of time in different iterations. In 1990, when he became the first African-American chairman of the Democratic Party, we went on our first major trip to Africa. And we visited 6 countries, including South Africa, where we met with the venerable Nelson Mandela Madiba when he had just been released from Robben Island a few months before. That was, in my mind, that trip, those meetings were the ability and time for Ron Brown to concretize his belief in Africa and that it mattered. And that trip was a precursor to many, many more that he pursued, took business people, met with political parties on both sides of every aisle in every country because he believed in dialogue and in reaching out, and really facilitated business for so many American corporations, small businesses, and for many Africans throughout the continent. So with that, I am going to briefly introduce these 2 honorable gentlemen, and you can read their bios fully, but their accomplishments and their current work is just so extensive that I'm honored to be on the screen with them. I have known Millard Arnold since 1981, and he became the minister counselor, the only one that was appointed by a Secretary of Commerce. Many of you may not know the Secretary of Commerce has the ability to appoint one person at the minister counselor level and to pick which country. And he picked well in Millard Arnold, and the country was South Africa, which was so exciting at that moment in history. And Jude Kearney, I had the honor of serving with him under Ron Brown, working with him on a daily, weekly basis. And my admiration for Jude and what he did then and what he has continued to do in his commitment to the continent, as has Millard, who lives in South Africa. So that's a major commitment. And I'm going to let them take it from here because I want to have the time for them. And I'll do a few Q&As after each one of them does a brief presentation. And then we'll open it up so that you can submit a question in the on the chat function. So I will turn first to Millard Arnold and ask him to tell us about what he's doing, his relationship with Ron, and about trade with Africa. Millard?
Well, thank you, Lori. And it's a great pleasure and honor, frankly, to be a part of this panel and to share my thoughts and views about a great American who had such an immeasurable impact, not just in the United States, but almost anywhere that he set foot. Ron Brown was an extraordinary human being, and it was my pleasure to have served under him and to have worked with him. There are a little more than 9,000 political appointments that an incoming president and his team can make in an effort to fulfill the new president's mission and campaign promises. Thanks to Ron Brown, I was appointed to what I considered the most unique of those 9,000 possible appointments. As Laurie has said, Ron asked me to serve as Minister Counselor for Commercial Affairs in South Africa with the equivalent rank of ambassador. Being selected for an ambassadorial position is not in and of itself all that unique. Ambassadors are appointed on a regular basis by every new president, and very little is made of such an appointment. But what made my selection unique is the history and background of the appointment. In the early 1980s, the American economy suffered through a deep recession. In response, government departments and agencies were instructed to review their activities and to eliminate unnecessary programs. The State Department, which had a commercial component as part of its endeavors, decided that it would focus on diplomacy, international relations, economic, and foreign affairs. Commerce was something they didn't think very highly of and spun off the commercial elements to the Department of Commerce. Well, that was all well and good, but we are a litigious society, and it wasn't long before one of the former State Department employees threatened to a lawsuit, arguing that they had joined the State Department to become an ambassador, and that opportunity had now been taken away from them. The resolution to that problem was to give the Secretary of Commerce the authority to appoint one minister counselor with the equivalent rank of ambassador anywhere in the world he or she deemed important. There had never been a minister counselor appointed to Africa until Ron Brown asked if I would serve in that capacity. I am certain that our moderator has something to do with this. As Laurie has had previously arranged to have me brief Ron before his first visit to South Africa, long before he became Secretary of Commerce. Initially, however, as the new Clinton administration took shape, I was actually asked if I would be interested in serving as an executive director to the World Bank. Again, I'm sure Laurie had something to do with this, but I got a call from Ron saying that he understood that I was considering taking the position at the World Bank. And he said, "Let me tell you why you won't." He said, from the White House, you know, they can see the World Bank every day. And when they can see you, they pay attention to you. I know how you feel about Africa, but Africa would not be your only focus at the World Bank. I got a better offer for you. I want you to serve as my Minister Counselor for Commercial Affairs in Africa, based out of South Africa. And I happen to know that your wife is South African. And if you turn this position down, I don't think you'll be going home anytime soon. Well, needless to say, I accepted the position. It demonstrated just how good Ron was at closing a deal. He was astute, savvy, and an excellent judge of character and timing. But more than this, he recognized the important signal it would send to Africa and the world at large. Unlike any previous Secretary of Commerce, Ron recognized that there was enormous potential for deeper commercial links with Africa, and that the U.S. private sector could play a significant role in creating jobs and expanding opportunities on the continent, while at the same time enhancing Africa's democratic process and furthering closer ties with African nations. He coined it commercial diplomacy. As a perceptive student of politics, Ron understood better than most the untapped potential that international trade could play in furthering American interests. He also recognized the enormous opportunity that South Africa's transition to a more inclusive democracy offered America in pursuit of our own values, principles, and goals. Under Ron's proddings, a U.S.-South African binational commission was formed with major participation of the private sectors of both countries. Because, again, in Ron's view, South Africa matters, and it mattered significantly to U.S. national interests. Never was that more clear than the fact that more than half of Clinton's cabinet visited South Africa during my tenure as Minister Counselor. As the Director General of the U.S. Foreign Commercial Service, Lori surrounded me with an exceptional team that allowed us to replicate Ron's global efforts to increase U.S. commercial activities abroad. As we believed that South Africa was not only a big emerging market, but a gateway to the rest of the African continent, we organized trade missions composed of U.S. companies based in South Africa to visit most of the countries in the region, including at the time the largest ever trade mission to Mauritius. We held frank discussions with President Mugabe in Zimbabwe and had briefings with commercial activities and units in Angola, Lesotho, Eswatini, and Botswana. As a consequence of both our regional outlook and outreach, and in particular our support of American business on the ground, the U.S. emerged as the largest foreign investor in South Africa. As my term of office drew to a close, James Joseph, the U.S. ambassador to South Africa at the time, held a going away ceremony for me and pointed out our achievements by stating the following. Millard, I think of what has been accomplished during your tenure. Think of it. There are now more than 800 American companies involved in the South African economy. They have more than 60 billion rands of assets and provide more than 100,000 South African jobs. The rate at which American companies have been arriving or expanding their operations in South Africa over the last 4 years is a direct tribute to the very effective work of the Foreign Commercial Service under your leadership here in South Africa. Now, as I mentioned earlier and hasten to add now, it was a team effort that was directly related to the professionalism of the staff that Lori put around me. In recognition of what we had accomplished, that team and I were awarded the U.S. Department of Commerce's highest honor, the Gold Medal Award for Distinguished Achievement in the Federal Service. For me, I think the most poignant moment occurred when we opened the Ron Brown Commercial Center following Ron's tragic death in 1996. The staff placed a plaque on the building reading, "This dedication is to our First Minister Counselor, Millard W. Arnold, as an expression of our deep gratitude for the guidance, leadership, commitment, vision, and dedication to the ideas of the late Secretary of Commerce, Ronald H. Brown." To have been able to fulfill Ron's promise and to have made a small difference has been, I think, the highlight of my career. As Lori said, I stayed on in South Africa after my term of office ended and became chairman of Black and Beach Africa until the company elected to run its African operations from London. I then joined the board of directors and was group legal counsel for Murray & Roberts, South Africa's largest construction company, where I stayed until I retired. But as a consequence of my experience as Minister Counselor for the United States, I was asked by the government of Singapore to serve as their honorary business representative in South Africa in an effort to replicate the same kinds of experience that we were able to achieve under Ron. Today, I'm a senior advisor to the law practice of Bowman's, where I provide guidance on commercial and strategic issues. But however great those achievements may have been, serving as Ron Brown's point man in Africa will remain my highest honor. His commitment and efforts to forge greater links with the African continent are still remembered on the continent 25 years after his death, and well, they should be. He was the visionary who made a remarkable difference. It was an honor and a pleasure to have served Ron as the first U.S. Minister Counselor for Commercial Affairs.
Thank you so much, Millard. Millard talked about what he was doing, what was happening at the Foreign Commercial Service, but I will say that that was only one place at the Commerce Department where Africa mattered. Clearly, my mandate was the world, but my major passion, commitment, and lifelong activities had focused on Africa to a certain extent. And none of this could have happened without Jude Kearney. Jude Kearney was asked by the secretary to put particular focus on Africa and being sure that the dream, the expectations that he had and that we had for the United States of America and for the subcontinent of Africa was fulfilled. And as I said, he had begun this journey very seriously in 1990. So here he was a few years later, able to move from chairman of the Democratic Party to the Secretary of Commerce. And he had the political credentials as former chairman of the party. He did not have the relationship that Jude Kearney had with President Bill Clinton, because Jude hails from Little Rock, Arkansas, where he knew the president and the president's men and women, so to speak, who populated the White House and so many agencies of the US government. So Jude was a bridge. He was a very important dimension. He was very trusted by Ron. And I depended on him to make sure that the Africa agenda was going to move forward. Even though he didn't report to me, he was Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Commerce Department in the International Trade Administration in another division other than the US and Foreign Commercial Service. So I'm going to turn it over to Jude and say that my friendship began with Jude at the Department of Commerce in 1993. And it has deepened with every year that has passed. And I am proud to say that 25 years later, we talk quite often and see each other quite often and collaborate. So Jude, turn it over to you.
Thanks, Melissa. You have been overkind, but all of these comments, remind us that this is a very worthy cause. And so with that, we also really must say about Mel and about CFA that Ron contributed mightily to the whole US-Africa discussion. But the first person that I met in Washington, D.C., who was a true Africanist when I moved here in the mid-1980s, was Mel Foote. And the compassion was very important to me because I'd had a bit of exposure to Africa right after I graduated from college. I had a fellowship from Harvard, and I chose to spend that year in Nigeria. So I was looking for opportunities to reconnect with Africa in a meaningful way. And, getting to know Mel and some of the others in Washington who were focused on Africa was very useful. Obviously, as Lori has just said, my ability to connect with Africa was expanded tremendously after we gathered around Secretary Brown as his lieutenants, as his staff. I had a bit of a giddiness when Janine asked that Lori Millard and I serve on a panel together. I mean, what Janine couldn't have known is that she really gave three of us like school kids the opportunity to have a wonderful reunion. We met on the phone before this, and it really was old homeschool week for us because, as Lori just said, we worked tirelessly on behalf of both the secretary and the department. But the three of us formed bonds that were really unusual, and it was part of the magic of Ron Brown. We came together around Ron Brown. We believed so strongly in who he was and what he was doing, and we began to believe in each other to that same level of commitment. And so we have remained very close. I lived in South Africa for several years, and Millard was absolutely one of my closest friends and collaborators and colleagues. I love talking about Ron Brown. Anybody who knows me knows this. But I got a rocky start with Ron Brown. I had met him several years before he became secretary in a funny way. I had, while I was a student at Stanford Law School, my last year, I was having serious interviews with law firms to try and determine where I was going to end up. I was mostly focused on New York, but I did have sort of an inkling of interest in Washington, D.C. So the only firm that I interviewed at in Washington, D.C. was this firm called Patton Boggs. And I interviewed there because there was a senior partner there from Arkansas whose name I knew, and he urged me to come and interview at the firm. And I met the chairman at the time, Tommy Boggs, and many of the partners, had a great conversation, was highly interested in that firm and highly interested in Washington, D.C. And so at the end of the day of interviews, and I was being walked out of the office by Tom Boggs, we stopped at an empty office. And Tom said wistfully, timing is everything. I really wanted you to meet this guy who sits in this office. This was 1983. I really wanted you to meet this guy. And, this had no meaning to me other than, well, clearly this was a missed opportunity from Tom's perspective. And there was a name tag on the door. I don't remember looking at the name tag, and certainly the name didn't in any way spark any sort of familiarity or anything. So I accepted Tom's, gracious comment that he wished that I could have met that person. And I went back to Stanford. 2 weeks later, I got a call. It was a Saturday, and it was 5:30 in the morning at my dorm. I got a call, and the person on the other end said, "Jude, I'm excited to say that your visit to our offices at Patton Boggs has resulted in us calling now to grant you, an offer to come and join us permanently when you graduate from law school." And I said, "Well, I'm not excited to say that it's only 5:30 in the morning here." We could have had this conversation a little bit later. But anyway, we had a decent conversation, and ultimately my desire to work in New York sort of outpaced my desire at that time to work in Washington. So I ended up taking a job with Skadden Arps, a large law firm in New York City, and stayed there for a few years, and eventually, as I said, moved to Washington, D.C. In 1987, when I started meeting many of the people in Washington. As I said, I met Mel and some others, and I met still not. He wasn't DNC chair. He was with the Urban League, and he was a partner at Patton Boggs. And I met this young, handsome, very, very dynamic guy, Ron Brown. And we're sitting there, we're trying to figure out, why do we know each other's name? And Ron finally said, "Oh, you're the smart aleck who told me that I called you too early when you were out at Stanford." And so we both laughed, and he says, "Yeah, that's why you didn't join us." And I said, "No, Ron, honestly, I was more focused on New York than anything else." So that was sort of my beginning with Ron Brown, so that when years later, Vernon Jordan convinced me as the chairman of the transition for the Clinton administration. I had been focused on possibly going to the White House counsel's office or doing something related to law. And Vernon Jordan said, "Jude, to be candid with you, I don't think that you'll serve, your big boss, the president, most by going and doing something that's already within your wheel well. Take some chances, be a part of some of the other important things that are going to happen." He says, "If I know Ron Brown, as I think I know him, he is going to make things happen at the Department of Commerce. I really urge you to look into joining the Department of Commerce rather than looking for, some of these middle-level legal jobs in the White House." And so I took his advice, went to the White House personnel office, got an appointment, ultimately to the Department of Commerce as a Deputy Assistant Secretary, and went up to see the Secretary. And I said, you know, Mr. Secretary, my joining you is going to be my apology and making up, you know, for the slight that I may have given you unintentionally when I was in law school. And we both had a great laugh about that. And he said, Jude, you know, we have got work to do. We've got work to do in this administration, and we've got work to do in this department. And I'm really glad to have you on board. And so that's how I ended up in Ron's orbit. And it was a wonderful recircling back to a man who clearly was outshining the rest of Washington, D.C. in terms of his capacity and his passion. So we've been asked to talk about, you know, the importance of Ron Brown on the African context and his importance to us as individuals. But, you know, you ask different people who was Ron Brown, and obviously people will have different things to say about who he was. He was probably different slightly even to Lori and Millard and me. But I'll tell you who he was to me, in addition to being a clear mentor and a wonderful friend. You know, three words actually sort of come to mind when I think of sort of Ron's legacy to me. The first is masterful. You know, Lori and Millard and others of you on these panels are going to remember that really no one met the moment as well as Ron did, no matter what stage he was on. Second word that I think of when I think of Ron, in addition to masterful, is really sort of being something of an alchemist. An alchemist is someone who takes sort of ordinary ingredients and creates some product that is so much better than either of the ingredients. And in ways, that's how I viewed Ron Brown. And most importantly, I also viewed Ron, and this was evident in the folks that he chose to bring into the department. He was empowering both the whites and the blacks and Asians and others who worked for Ron Brown knew, first of all, that he had their backs. But second of all, he expected lots of us, and he would create lanes for us to do what he expected of us. Let me give you a few examples of each of those words. In regards to masterful, and my best memory of where I thought of that word was in 1993 when we went to South Africa at the request of the White House to lead the first presidentially authorized mission to then apartheid South Africa, but on its way towards democracy. Ron and his entourage, including me, had the responsibility of sitting with each of the three titans in South Africa, which is daunting, you know, just in and of itself. But the masterful part was that Ron, first of all, gave great and real earnest acknowledgement to F.W. de Klerk, who had, you know, on his own shoulders decided that apartheid, you know, was no longer appropriate, and called for first of all, he called for the release of Nelson Mandela, and second of all, he called for elections. So it was impossible for us not to acknowledge that fact, and Ron acknowledged it very, very well. Second, we met with the second titan, you know, Dr. Buthelezi, the head of the IFP, and clearly had his own commitment to, you know, the rights and aspirations of Africans in South Africa, and the right to, you know, the ability to lead and direct themselves. And obviously, there was a great cataclysm between Buthelezi on the one side and our third titan. But Ron understood that however the elections turned out, it was important to keep Mangosuthu Buthelezi in the camp. of whatever eventuated in South Africa. And his words to Dr. Buthelezi in those meetings were some of the most prophetic words I've ever heard. And they really, truly were diplomatic. Both Millard and Lori have spoken of Ron essentially creating this sort of economic diplomacy. Ron evinced it in this trip to South Africa more than I've ever seen anyone else do. Thirdly, and obviously most importantly, and this is where the mastery comes in, we had to sit with Madiba. And this whole trip comes about because of a Rose Garden speech given by Bill Clinton and Madiba together, where Madiba asked that sanctions be lifted and that the U.S. re-engage. So our purpose in being there really was surrounded by our admiration for Madiba. But we couldn't, in that context of upcoming elections, be so bold as to say, those other two aren't important. We couldn't publicly say what, probably all of us were thinking. But the mastery is this: by the time we left South Africa, not a single person didn't feel that they had been honorably treated by Secretary Brown. And most importantly, Madiba, without having been told, knew that he had a gold star next to his name. And so that was one of the most meaningful experiences I've ever had with a boss, with a mentor, with a friend. So that's mastery. The empowerment and his empowering nature was evident in many ways, and it was probably known by Lori and many others who knew that they could go out and be aggressive on behalf of the department and on behalf of foreign services and on behalf of foreign trade and commerce. Because Ron not only would support them, he required it of us. So most people don't know that the Department of Commerce gets a seat at the board of Exim Bank ex officio. It's almost unofficial, but it's a requirement that we be given that seat. Ron had way more obligations than he could possibly live up to on his own. So he asked that I sit in that board seat at the department, at the Exim Bank board. A freshly minted Exim Bank chairman had just been, appointed by Clinton, Ken Brody, direct from Wall Street, very aggressive, very smart, very knowledgeable guy. My first board meeting, Ken Brody made it crystal clear, as if he wanted to make sure that the new administration heard him, that he was giving no special treatment to Africa, that there would be no, preferential lending. And in fact, I remember him saying that he would treat, requests for lending on Africa projects as if he were sitting in Wall Street. That was the standard at which he intended to treat lending in Africa. And I probably normally, that the person sitting on behalf of the Commerce Department would recognize that they had limited ability or even authority to address the issue. But in my feeling of empowerment from Ron Brown, I absolutely objected. Not only objected strenuously to those words by Chairman Brody, but committed to being in touch, obviously with others at the Department of Commerce and others within the administration to make sure that Ken Brody got the memo that had been written by really Bill Clinton with regards to his outpouring of support for Africa, but especially the memo from Ron Brown that Africa mattered. So that within the context of a year or so, Ken Brody and Exim Bank began very clearly to change their policies with regards to lending to Africa. They increased the size of loans, and they ameliorated the standards by which they were going to judge whether or not to lend to Africa. And this wasn't true. This empowerment we carried not just to Exim Bank, but to all of the trade agencies, Exim Bank, TDA, many of the others, to make sure that in addition to a broader outreach to the world, that there was special attention paid to Africa. We felt empowered to do it, and Ron Brown, I think, was proud that we did. With regards to alchemy, his ability to create, wonderful things out of ordinary circumstances, I think both Millard and Lori have spoken to that already. The Department of Commerce had never been a particularly stellar cabinet position, cabinet department. Ron understood that the ability to do what he and the administration wanted to do in terms of creating new opportunities, new partnerships, meant that, he had to go beyond just discussing the, the economic benefit to us and to these foreign destinations. He also wanted to make sure that these foreign destinations, and particularly Africa, understood that what this increased trade came with was increased partnership. So Ron, really out of whole cloth, created in the Department of Commerce a force to be reckoned with in regards to foreign trade policy, and to some extent in regards to Africa policy. So much so that when Penny Pritzker, my classmate from both Harvard and Stanford, was nominated for the commerce position, she asked if I would sit with her for a few days to really explain to her how Ron approached Africa. In other words, she made her decision to go to commerce depend not on what Ron did around the world, but what Ron had in mind for Africa, because she wanted to replicate. And we had wonderful conversations, and indeed, anyone who followed her tenure at Commerce will know that she paid great attention to Africa in ways that Ron would have been proud of. I really could go on forever. I just want now to end with just a few additional comments about my friend Ron Brown. One of my greatest mementos from my time with Ron was a picture that was taken during our trip to South Africa, that first trip. In this picture, I'm shown standing around Mandela and with everyone else, and Ron is slightly behind him. And for whatever reason, I don't know that it was true at the time. For whatever reason, this picture portrays it as if Nelson Mandela is talking directly to me. So I love this picture, but actually the funny and the reason I love it most is that the look on Ron's face as Mandela is appearing to talk to me was like, Jude, have you forgotten who the secretary is? It was truly a moment in time that we will never, ever forget. Another of my memories was Ron. Oh, there's the picture. So as you can see on that picture, Ron is looking at me like, Jude, what's going on? Another great memory was I took Ron's instructions very seriously with regards to doing our role in Africa. And so I was there very frequently, trying to create new partnerships. And Ron called me one Saturday. He says, I can't believe I'm reaching you in the US. He says, people sometimes say they can't reach you. And all I can say is that if you can't reach Jude, he better be in Africa. And, I always understood that he supported so much what I was doing and what others were doing in Africa. And finally, my other memory is of my dad. When Ron took the secretary position at the Department of Commerce, my dad was almost 90 years old. He had gotten to know, in the context of Arkansas, because Bill Clinton had hired so many Kearneys in his Arkansas administration. My dad had actually gotten to know Bill Clinton pretty well. You know, Clinton was always bothering him and calling him and, you know, just wondering how he turned out so many ridiculous and you know, sort of productive cronies. So my dad's focus wasn't so much that I had joined this administration to be a part of the Clinton administration. I was the seventh crony that had been hired by Bill Clinton. What he told me was that, you know, Jude, I want you to make that young Black man proud. He says, my generation, we're old, but our old selves are so proud of him that I want you to repay it by making him proud of you. And that stuck with me forever. So listen, as you can probably tell, I could go on forever with regards to Ron. The bottom line is this. Ron's legacy is that he made a difference in a lot of different places, but I can tell you, Africans know it. He made a difference in Africa that no one else could have done but him. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jude and Millard. Those were such important memories and important observations about a fantastic man. Let me ask you on that subject, you said to so many Africans, Jude, to both Millard and Jude, what evidence do you have that Ron was appreciated for what he did in Africa, from governments, from private sector, from ordinary citizens? Can you speak to how you knew how important his contributions had been, because you both live on the continent, and Millard, you still live there. Could you speak to that, please?
Sure. Jude, if you don't mind, I'll start first. It's interesting that you should ask that question because it must have been last week or thereabouts that I got a call from one of my colleagues whom I'd worked closely with during the days of the U.S. South African Binational Commission. And he had served as one of the South African participants on that commission. And he was just simply calling to stay in touch because of how valuable he had found the relationship that had been established by Ron Brown and the United States in terms of furthering an interest in Africa and committing the United States to doing all that it possibly could to ensure that South Africa was successful. Now he called and he asked about Ron. He talked about Ron. He didn't ask, but he talked about Ron and how he remembers those days and how important it was to him and to others who had participated as part of that commission. And that view of his was carried out by others that I see fairly frequently, who had the opportunity to have met Ron or to have known of what he's done. His legacy is still very much alive here in South Africa. And many, many people, whenever I mention that I served in the Clinton administration, will always mention Ron Brown and the role that he had played in furthering greater relationships between South Africa and the United States, and particularly the role he had played in encouraging American investment and greater commercial activities between the two countries. So I think he's here in South Africa, he's deeply remembered. And one last thought, when he passed away, we planted a tree, Trevor Manuel, myself, and some others at the U.S. Embassy. And that tree now, as you can imagine, 25 years later, has grown into our tower of strength in the embassy. And every time I'm there and go by it, it just reminds me so much of what kind of person and impact Ron Brown had been.
Thanks, Millard. Jude?
Yeah, I can say some similar things. There are two demonstrations that I recall that really punctuated how valuable and relevant he was to Africa. I had met with President Rawlings of Ghana while Ron was still alive, actually at Ron's direction, to talk about what Ghana was doing and its somewhat favored position with regards to multilateral organizations and U.S. organizations. So we wanted to develop a special relationship with Ghana. And as Laura, you recall, Ron went to Ghana at one point as well. But so after Ron's death, because I'd already gotten to know some people in the Rawlings administration, I actually got a call from one of President Rawlings' assistants, and he said the president would like to speak with you. And so I spoke with President Rawlings, and he was giving his condolences and the like. And he said to me, and as you probably recall, he had this deep, booming voice, and it sounded, almost terrifying. But he said to me, Jude, who among you is going to take the place of this man? And he wasn't asking this question, in an accusatory way, but he was literally looking for a good answer. He knew the importance that Ron Brown had brought to the U.S.-Africa dialogue, and he was genuinely interested in the answer. Who among those of you still in Washington and those still in this administration can follow through on what he's done? Now, thankfully, over time, both through people like Mel and others, and including people in administrations, there was continued great focus on Africa. Ron had created space for us, but that call was jarring in regards to how valuable he was viewed on the continent.
Yeah, I will just add to that, of course, we're talking about Africa here today, but of course, Ron had, and I had under him, responsibility for the whole world, 130 offices. And I traveled with him throughout the world. But the constant that I think relates to this type of commitment was that Ron, when he went to Brazil, or when he went to China, or when he went to Japan, even to countries that were considered to be a very what is the word? Homogeneous populations, that they were not diverse, like in China and Japan. He insisted on meeting with marginalized communities. When he was in Brazil, he met with the Afro-Brazilian community. He went into the favelas. He let the government know that there were no Afro-Brazilians in the administration in Brazil. He spoke out about people of African descent in any country he went to, including in Latin America, where there are many Africans, people of African descent, who populate, as we know, the entire world. And we saw that during Black Lives Matter, where we saw protests across the world for rights of people of color. And Ron embodied that in everything he did. He was consistent. He also was a trailblazer, and he wanted to be the first, not because of ego, because he believed that it was his duty to break barriers and to trailblaze. He was offered by President Clinton the position of United Nations ambassador, U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. He really thought about it very, very hard. It was in New York. He would have to move his family and all those things, but he was from New York. He decided not to do it, and one of the reasons was because he would not have been the first African-American U.S. ambassador to the UN. People may misinterpret that, oh, he wanted to be the first, but he felt he could serve somewhere else in the administration where he could indeed be a trailblazer and be the first and make change, similar to what he said to you, Millard, about going to the World Bank. He believed that in his heart of hearts. If we could take a couple of questions, if there are any, from those participating. I'll ask Janine if she's there, if anyone has put a question in the chat. And if you would share that with us, Janine, if someone has.
Currently, Lori, I don't see any questions. If anyone has one that they'd like to put into the chat box right now.
Okay, well, we'll keep going. And if one comes up, Janine, let me know, just interrupt.
Okay.
Can you gentlemen speak to policy then, accomplishments then, during his term? You spoke to Penny Pritzker, former Secretary Penny Pritzker's desire to carry on that tradition with a focus on Africa. Overall, however, in the last 25 years, what is your opinion of what has happened from the man who said Africa matters and actually put action to his words? And what has happened in subsequent administrations up till today, very new, with President Biden? How do you feel about the things that have progressed and the things that have not?
Millard, do you want to go first, or?
You're on mute, Millard.
It's a very good question, Lori. From my perspective, certainly I've been here in South Africa since I ended my tour of duty as a minister counselor. So I can only speak from the South African perspective about what I've seen. The most important thing, I think, is that Ron brought a certain passion, a commitment, a dedication, a drive to want to make a difference. My appointment as minister counsel is one such indication of that, but the three of us and the rest of our teams that we served with at the Department of Commerce and elsewhere in government, we're all deeply, deeply committed to trying to make a difference here on the continent. What I've seen since Ron's unfortunate demise and the end of the Clinton administration, quite frankly, has been Africa has just become another box that you check as work that needs to be done. But essentially, if it can stay, if you can keep it out of the headlines, you've done your job. No one else is interested really in the kind of commitment the way that I think that Ron exhibited during the time. On the other hand, I would say that what Ron did put in motion and the work that I think you, Lori, you, Jude, and our other colleagues were able to achieve established a platform that made it very difficult to move away from. We can never go back to what it was like before Ron Brown. So in some ways, yes, there is a level of disappointment, even in the terms of the amount of private investment that we've seen flowing out of the United States into South Africa. Sure, I would have liked to have seen a lot more than what we've seen. But I do think that what we have seen is in many ways a direct consequence of the Ron Brown legacy and what Ron meant to the continent. So I'll stop there and pick it up if necessary, but I don't see quite, for me, it's about the passion, it's about the commitment, and it's about the drive that was a part of our involvement in the administration, and I'm sure the other administrations would say they have that same drive and the same commitment, but I just haven't seen it.
Okay, thanks, Millard. Jude?
Yeah, I know that we're running out of time.
Yeah, we are, and I'm going to close out in a minute, but go ahead, please, and offer.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say that I agree with what Millard has said. Obviously, no one brought the intensity that Ron brought, but I'm on the continent literally all the time, and I don't think this is controversial to say, but Africans that I talk to have their preferences, and Ron is number one, no two ways about it. But they share their likes and preferences and dislikes equally among Republicans and Democrats. And I will just simply say that the jury is still out on Biden, obviously, who is really, I think, showing up well with regards to Africa so far. But as of right now, as far as presidents are concerned, and I think Mel probably can confirm this, most Africans, who are focused on the business aspects, really like the Bush administration. There's a kinship between many Africans and Bush's sort of proactivity with regards to certain issues. But that can be fleeting. But I think that Joe Biden is going to probably have a better legacy in Africa than most.
Thanks, Jude. I'm going to close out because I want to keep this almost on time with a passage that I think really sums up what the Clinton administration felt, led by President Clinton, about Ron Brown. On April 10th, 1996, President William Jefferson Clinton delivered a stirring eulogy at the National Cathedral for Ronald Harmon Brown, a man who had become his dear friend, became his Secretary of Commerce, and who, on a government plane with 35 others, had lost his life in service to the nation while on a trade mission to war-torn Croatia and Bosnia. President Clinton called Ron an incredible life force who loved success, was always so kind to people without regard to their station in life, and a man who had lived a truly American life. He said Ron Brown was so daring that he, a man of African American heritage, would compete for the chairmanship of the Democratic National Committee, and against all the odds, win the position, becoming the first African American to lead that organization. And then go on to get him elected president. To put no finer a point on his words, Bill Clinton said there were only two people who believed he could be president at the outset of his quest, his mother and Ron Brown. I'll end on that note and say to Mel, thank you for the opportunity, and say to my friends Millard and Jude that it has been Old Home Week, and it's such a pleasure to remember Ron Brown and to honor him and to remind many of the people who followed us and who stand on the shoulders of Ron Brown. Sometimes they don't know it because they weren't around. And some of these panelists who are coming up were not born. And some of the people watching were not born 25 years ago. And we can take pride in our vintage existences and the fact that we're here to remember and to remind. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Janine. And thank you, Millard and Jude.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori, for your moderation. Thank you, Jude and Millard. Your reflections have been outstanding on the life and legacy of Secretary Brown and all that he contributed to really making Africa matter with regard to trade and investment with the United States. I remember I was actually living in Cote d'Ivoire, and I remember he even had an impact there with one of the first commercial officers that he appointed, and the joy and exhilaration that she had. And up to this day, she's a friend of mine, and she still talks about the moment when Ron Brown was the person that swore her into the Foreign Commercial Service. And so his life, his legacy, his commitment live on in so many things, I think, that are happening today with regard to putting Africa more on the map with regard to Africa, with regard to the U.S. and investors from here looking at the continent as a place to go. I thank you all for your time this morning, and we're going to turn to the second panel now, which in many ways picks up on the theme of what is that legacy and how do we really encourage and enable the diaspora to participate in the opportunities that the continent presents today. And moderating that panel is a dear friend to CFA and to me. He is Eric Guichard. Eric is the Chief Executive Officer of Arango, which is an investment corporation that provides a continental Africa investment platform that focuses on unlocking potential for transformative growth of private and public assets brought on by the African Continental Free Trade Area. Eric has a long career in working in investment platforms, particularly with the diaspora. Prior to this, he was the founder and CEO of Homestrings in both the US and the UK, which was another diaspora investment advisory platform. He launched the first ever Diaspora investment crowdfunding platform where they were able to put $30 million into 13 countries and 25 projects. He created innovative instruments such as Diaspora bonds. His work has been really award-winning. He's won awards as Entrepreneur of the Year in 2013 in the UK, African Financer of the Year in 2014 in the UK, and we also at CFA honored him with our Trailblazers Award. Before Orengo and Homestrings, and up to today, he's still working on sovereign and other advisory assignments with the private sector and for certain countries. He was a portfolio manager at the World Bank. He's a graduate of the University of Dakar, Duquesne University, and the Harvard Business School. He serves on a number of nonprofit boards. He has been featured in Wall Street Journal, Forbes Africa, CNBC, Euromoney, BBC TV, BBC Radio, amongst others. I think it goes without saying we're going to have an excellently moderated panel, and he will bring his panelists on now. Thank you, Eric, for always being there for us.
Thank you, Janine. It's my pleasure to always be called and join this illustrious platform which you and Mel have created, and we all converge to share ideas and move the culture forward. I had the pleasure of listening to the previous panel, and I'm amazed at the quality of the people that you've assembled and the depth of the conversation that was had. Fortunately for me, Laurie, I was actually around, so great for you to suggest that this panel is younger than 25 years old, but we're here to say that we were around, so I do remember that. So without further ado, we have a fantastic panel. This one will be quite illuminating. I'm going to go over the profiles of the panelists, starting first with the Honorable Camille Richardson, who's Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Middle East and Africa Global Markets. Camille is a tenured senior Foreign Service officer with the U.S. Commercial Service. She began her career in government with the International Trade Administration at the U.S. Department of Commerce in 1993. She became an accredited diplomat with the U.S. Commercial Services in 1998 and has served 6 consecutive tours of duty in Miami, in Buenos Aires, in Rio de Janeiro, Nairobi, Mumbai, Sao Paulo, facilitating commercial partnerships between the U.S. and local companies. She was recently appointed as Commerce ETA's new Deputy Assistant Secretary for the MEA region. She's a native of Washington, D.C. Camille earned a bachelor's in international relations from Brown University and a master's in international relations from Johns Hopkins. She speaks Portuguese and Ponturhol, along with a bit of Hindi, Swahili, and French. Welcome, Camille. Our second panelist has also an illustrious career. I've known C.D. Glynn for quite a while, and so very happy to reconnect, with him. C.D. in May of this year was appointed Vice President for Pepsicola's foundation, focusing on global as a global head for philanthropy for PepsiCo Foundation. Prior to that, he was CEO of the Africa Foundation, which is a creation of Congress. And then prior to that, he worked at the Rockefeller Foundation. And then I believe prior to that, he also led, as an Obama appointee, led the Peace Corps' global business development activity. He designed and executed the agency's first strategic plan for partnerships, generating and leveraging over 19.5 million in additional funding through agreements with federal agencies, international NGOs, corporations, and foundations. Early in his career, he was Vice President Business Development at Pixera Global, a nonprofit development consulting firm, an independent economic development and community engagement consultant in Lagos and Kano in Nigeria. Glenn CD has earned a bachelor's from Howard University in Washington, D.C., a master in business management from Freeman School of Business at Tulane, and a master's diploma in strategy. Lincoln University to sit in one of the conferences organized by his venerable mother. And to development, and none other than Michael Sudakasa. Michael Sudakasa is currently the Chief Executive Officer of the Africa Business Group, he's a commercial attorney and economic development practitioner. His areas of specialty include Africa private sector development, international trade, networking handbook that I remember ever being created almost two decades ago. He sits on a number of boards. He's currently International Trade and Infrastructure Chair of the Africa CSO Committee of the Africa EU Partnership Forum. He's been a past chair of the African Law Committee of the Section of International Law of the American Bar Association, and served on the boards of the Calvert New Africa Fund. Michael holds a JD from Harvard Law School, a bachelor's in history from the University of Michigan. He completed postgraduate studies in international law at the University of San Diego, Institute on International and Comparative Law in Paris, France, international trading at the American Graduate School of International Management as well. Welcome, Michael. Last but not least, we have Benji Fehintola, who's a CFA. Benji is currently Senior Director, Head of Treasury and Finance Institutions at the Africa Finance Corporation. He's also past president and board member of the CFA Society for Nigeria. He's a strong advocate of capital markets development with a board level involvement in several institutions, served as president of the CFA Nigeria, as I mentioned. Excellent academic pedigree, has won several awards and has graduated top of his class, and also deep understanding of accounting as he has a CFA. He is also a former member of the Treasury Sales and Derivatives Marketing for Citigroup, and also worked as a member of the Tax and Business Consulting for Anderson. He's a graduate at the University of Glasgow, where he got his master's in international finance, at the University of Ibadan, where he got his bachelor's. Welcome, Benji. So just very quickly, in terms of logistics, we have structured this this discussion as a conversation, among practitioners steep in the issues of trade, steep in the issues of development, also steep in, obviously steep in the issues of the diaspora. And so we're going to try to make this as fluid as possible. There are a set of questions for debate that we've drafted that will anchor the discussion, and we hope at the end of this exchange that we'll have questions that you will submit through the chat box. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off the first question. Please keep in mind that I'm trying to manage time here, so I will intervene just to make sure that we keep things flowing. The theme of this conference is strategies, or this discussion is strategies for increasing diaspora trade and investment in Africa. Very, very broad. A lot of implications there about the connection in terms of trade and business between the U.S. and the continent. I mean, there was history talked about earlier in the first panel. The diaspora has been extremely active, and the question is, how do we make sure that the diaspora, both a priority as expressed by the AU and also expressed through the State Department under the Honorable Secretary Clinton, as a major force, a major competitive advantage that the country has. And so without further ado, I have my first question addressed to Camille. The panel is obviously about trade with Africa and how to engage the diaspora to increase trade. Given your extensive experience, particularly geographically, what strategies has the ITA adopted to tap into the richness of the diaspora? The U.S. being a country of immigrants, the diaspora could be construed as a significant competitive advantage the U.S. has over other countries. Camille?
Thank you so much, Eric, for the question. And I actually like to start off by thanking Lori and Mel and the Constituency for Africa to invite me to participate in this very august panel on this occasion, marking the 25th anniversary of Secretary Brown's passing. It's especially meaningful for me because I started my career at Commerce under his watch. And I'd like to say that, Millard, today at Commerce, we are committed more than ever to his ideals of partnership and relationship building and inclusive international trade with Africa that Secretary Brown focused on during his tenure. And so to your question and statement, Eric, I'd say you're absolutely right. In my experience supporting all kinds of US companies overseas, I've seen that one of the major impediments for them is overcoming cultural gaps. And cultural understanding is critical, but it's often an overlooked aspect of international trade. So as you suggest, we think that America's African diaspora has a tremendous advantage in African markets relative to their peers, because they're much more likely to understand the social nuances and market dynamics better than anyone else. And I think that the African diaspora in America has the potential as an economic force that we have yet to fully tap into. And once we do, we can really begin to shape the presence, the relationships, and the success of US businesses across the continent. And the challenge for us as the US government is to make sure that the African diaspora entrepreneurs here and businesses in the United States are well informed and have as easy an access as possible to the services and tools that we offer that can help them to conduct trade and investment in Africa. And, I've actually done a little bit of outreach and kind of realized that unfortunately, after 40-odd years, we're still the best kept secret in international trade. And it's something that we're definitely working to change. But I'm not just speaking about the Department of Commerce here. We actually have 17 US government agencies that are working together under our new US Prosper Africa initiative. And each agency provides a unique form of assistance that could be of value to anyone pursuing business in Africa, from financing to project preparation to strategic relationship building to commercial diplomacy. And specifically, as part of Prosper Africa, the Commerce Department and the Small Business Administration, SBA, are leading the development of a whole of US government approach to expand the participation of businesses that are typically underserved in international trades, groups that perhaps would have underutilized the US government as support for business and trade. And from Commerce specifically, we are focusing heavily on outreach in the United States to minorities, to women, and to diaspora-led businesses through our Global Diversity Export Initiative. And as part of this, we're also developing a series of outreach events across the United States that will allow us to hear from members of the diaspora and to share information about our tools and services and connect interested companies with follow-up events and engagements, which we're actually calling on-ramps that can lead them to real business opportunities that the US government may have the resources to support. In fact, we have an event coming up next month, October 7th through 9th, that we're very, very excited about. The East Africa Chamber of Commerce in Dallas, Texas is organizing a trade and investment conference where we expect the audience to be largely diaspora. And we will have several US government officials, including myself, participating to get the word out about what we have to offer to business, just as we did at the Corporate Council on Africa Summit back in July. And events like this are one way that we hope to make contacts and lead as many diaspora businesses as possible to the on-ramps that I mentioned by connecting them with our domestic network of US export assistance centers. And I hope that my colleague Giancarlo is perhaps putting that link in the chat, as well as our commercial service teams that are located strategically in embassies and consulates across the continent, so that we can plug business into our full suite of export promotion services to facilitate trade. And it could also mean an on-ramp could also mean taking advantage of business counseling from SBA, as I mentioned, or tapping into Commerce's Minority Business Development Agency. Hopefully those links are also going in the chat. It could also mean, an on-ramp could also mean accessing our new online platforms for finding trade and investment opportunities, including one that we just launched and piloted this year. We're very, very excited about. We want to help position companies on the front end of projects before they actually go to tender. And we're calling this Express Leads Middle East and Africa, or ELMIA. We've been piloting it with a very small universe of 3,000 to 4,000 companies, and we hope to go much bigger soon and globally as an offering of the commercial service in the coming year. It could also mean tapping into Prosper Africa's virtual deal room, which we'll also share a link to in the chat box. There are reverse trade missions that offer opportunities that our partners at the U.S. Trade Development Agency are sponsoring by bringing African decision makers and buyers to the United States. It might also mean attending some trade shows, whether it's virtual or in person these days. Most notably is our upcoming Trade Winds event that we're holding in Dubai, March 6th through 8th of 2022, in conjunction with the World Expo there. So we'll have all of our top commercial diplomats there for business counseling. We'll have matchmaking. We'll have opportunities to visit various markets throughout the Middle East and Africa region. And we'll have a very special focus on women's empowerment as part of that event. And another on-ramp could mean participating in our national listening tour that we've launched on Africa to help shape a meaningful commercial engagement strategy, based on a new partnership with Africa that President Biden highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. Very substantive, many strands to follow up on. And I do see that we have several links in the chat room. Please, copy those if you're an attendee. A lot of very good information. I'd like to move to CD. I mean, you've done some extensive work from the philanthropy side, some amazing accomplishments in terms of programs that you've created, connections that you've supported, and then obviously there's this debate in the U.S. about reparations for farmers, and you now part of your global portfolio are deeply involved in both on the policy and the practical side in food security. Knowing what we know about the diaspora, knowing what you know about the potential within the ag space, within the food security space, what opportunities do you see of creating connections from your current vantage point? Have you, prior, either at ADF or in other incarnations of the Peace Corps, looked at the diaspora? What programs that you may have supported? And if so, what are those programs? What can be leveraged? And if not, what have been the impediments?
No, great. Thanks, Eric. Really appreciate this opportunity. Good seeing you again. Good seeing everyone again. I've sort of been sort of under the radar for the past 4 months, as was mentioned. In May, took a new job in a new sector and moved to a new city and a number of things. So this is sort of a great coming out party. And I couldn't be more proud or prouder of this opportunity to do this while we do commemorate the 25th anniversary of the death of Secretary Ron Brown. I had the distinct honor and privilege in 1992 as an intern with the DNC to be in New York for the Democratic National Convention, and Ron Brown then was chairman. So this is a real real pleasure and opportunity to sort of be here today for this event. I want to personally thank Mel and Janine and Lori. I mean, this in the spirit of Ubuntu, I am because we are. And I when Lori made the call and said, "Hey, can you show up?" It was a done deal. So really great to be here and great to be on the panel with obviously Camille and Michael and just friends and basically family of a number of years. Now at Pepsico, when I think about the work that I've done over my career, this is just another feather in the cap of really increasing trade and investment with Africa, particularly amongst the diaspora. At PepsiCo, we are, as everyone knows, sort of one of the largest food and beverage companies in the world. And don't just think "quote unquote" Pepsi Cola. Think Gatorade, think Quaker, think Tropicana, think Frito-Lay and Lay's potato chips. If you had some oatmeal this morning, it probably was a Quaker product. And so, as a large food and beverage company, we are basically an agricultural company, and we made a commitment to really increase our support for not only people of color at large, but in the communities where we live and work, the businesses that we link into our supply chain, and the work we do in communities around the world to really look at underserved populations and people and really increase opportunities for them. The work that I lead from a philanthropic standpoint, from a social impact standpoint at PepsiCo, is focused around three primary areas of creating equitable access for food security. And this is access to nutritious foods around the world, particularly in the United States and emerging economies and markets for us. But it's also about sustainable agriculture. And so that sustainable agriculture is happening all over the world, but even in the US, I fund a number of projects that actually, as you sort of alluded to, Eric, that really supports Black farmers in the United States and linking them into our supply chain. And some of these farmers do claim their ancestral heritage to the continent of Africa. So our work in food security is critical with driving greater connectivity to diaspora people, populations, communities throughout the United States. We have access to safe water is another real big important area for social impact for us around the world. And we recently launched a new initiative to really focus on sub-Saharan Africa and looking at access to safe water. And this is water conservation, this is distribution, but there's also purification. And so just really, have a strong commitment to the continent and also to the US. And the area that we have a direct impact around diaspora communities is really in our economic opportunity pillar. This is really creating economic opportunity for underserved communities. And we do that by focusing around small business, particularly Black restaurants, by focusing around educational opportunities, particularly community college. So getting young people of color in communities throughout the United States into community college to give them access to education, which is an on-ramp to the middle class, to economic opportunity writ large. And we not only get them into community college, but after those 2 years, we have another program that really links them to go into 4-year educational opportunities for them. So we want to get them in and we want to help them advance. And that focus on economic opportunity through investing in Black-owned businesses, particularly restaurants, and investing in communities around looking at education opportunities are critical things that we do from a philanthropic standpoint. Before 4 months ago, when I was at the African Development Foundation and leading that work, it was a big focus around diaspora communities and linking to, as Camille has mentioned, legislation such as AGOA, and looking at programs such as the trade hubs, and then iterations of Trade Africa and Prosper Africa, but really have focused at that time on the demand side, looking at the challenge of investing, whether diaspora or writ large, investing in Africa. A lot of it is on the demand side. Is there demand for U.S. goods and services by African enterprises and African entrepreneurs? And at ADF, as we invested directly into African enterprises, African entrepreneurs, grassroots communities, we were creating that demand for U.S. goods and services. And that was really, really important and an important pillar of trade and investment, because we know that the diaspora in the U.S. have a natural affinity for Africa, and they know the context unlike other populations. And so if we were successful, and this is still an ongoing effort at ADF in terms of our core competency and capability to really develop, grow, and scale African enterprises so that they can trade and invest with the US, whether it's on the demand side of creating an opportunity for US technology, for US goods, for US services, or it's on the supply side of linking into a number of US companies and US businesses and and U.S. small businesses that somewhat are run by diasporan populations, a really critical element of the work of ADF. You know, some programs that I'll really highlight is our work at ADF in my previous capacity to really focus around investing in diasporans here in the U.S. who are looking at startups in Africa. And Eric, you've done a lot of work on this, but thinking about the fintech space and a number of entrepreneurs in the U.S. who claim their ancestral heritage to Africa, but who are here now, who either want to invest, quote unquote, back home, or look at opportunities to actually remigrate, you know, back to Africa. We at ADF were funding a number of projects and programs to help them really create those economic opportunities from startup to scale ups. And that was a lot through the African Diaspora Network. It's an organization that I really encourage all of us to look at, ADN, who does a lot of work in what they call building Africa's future investors and investment opportunities. The other one that's an unsung sort of collaboration opportunity that we all can see is only going to grow is with professional sports figures. So I created with at ADF a relationship with the National Basketball Players Association's foundation. This is the NBA Players Union Foundation. What you have in the NBA are, you know, now tens and 20 and hundreds of young millionaires, many of whom are of African descent or directly or ancestrally, who have a natural affinity and connection to the continent. And a number of them want to invest back into local communities. And at ADF, one of the things that was critical for me was to link them to opportunities to support their communities and small businesses back in their homes and back in the communities that they had come from. And they were doing this from a charitable standpoint, but we said, let's do it from a venture philanthropy, maybe an impact investing standpoint. So really linking with African players in the NBA and helping them deploy capital and really create opportunities for further investment from U.S. diasporans to African communities. I mean, the flagship person for this and the standard bearer obviously is Camille, but now a number of young African players are looking at investing back in the continent, again, where they have a natural understanding, but also linked to organizations such as the African Development Foundation to really co-create opportunities and to co-invest in opportunities that really have a development, social impact, and maybe impact investment opportunities. So let me just stop there. I'm going to share more about PepsiCo and our engagement with the continent and what we feel like is our unique contribution as a global food and beverage company. But I just say personally that this topic and this issue is paramount to all I've done in my entire career. Is really creating opportunities and linkages for greater trade and investment by people of color, by the diasporans to Africa, and to really link back from Africa opportunities here in the U.S., particularly, as you mentioned, in the agricultural and food and beverage space. So happy to be here and look forward to sharing more.
Yes, thank you very much. That was very, very good. I mean, we're going to come back to a number of the examples that you mentioned. I'd like to move to Michael. Michael, I mean, we all know that you've made some deep commitments in terms of your time and the work that you've done in the ag space, among others. I'd like to do a slight deep dive here and start talking about transactions in particular. One in particular that we've seen from our vantage point here at Homestrings are diasporans returning and creating new platforms, innovative platforms. One of which within the ag space is the Hello Tractor proposition, which I initially came across through a USAID diaspora marketplace event some 10, 11 years ago. Can you comment first of all about this movement? Is it a one-off? Is it a wave? Is it sustainable? And also, could you address how members of the panel could support, sustain, whether it's through philanthropy, through policy support, through impact investments? Could you comment on that with a specific focus on Hello Tractor as an example?
Sure, and I've had the opportunity to meet the Hello Tractor team both in Nigeria and Kenya. And really, in fact, met him in Germany. First off, what they epitomize, which is something that has happened. CD talked about the community of Africans, young Africans who are playing sports in the U.S. There's also been, over the last 20, 30 years, a huge number of young Africans who've been educated in the U.S. You talked about some of them were born in the U.S., some of them came to the U.S. very young. Some of them have family in the U.S. and came over for an education. But they are looking at the continent because it's a region that in the next 30 years, for every 10 years, will grow by 330 million people as an opportunity. And so they're bi-coastal with a different twist, setting up operations on the continent, often fundraising in the United States, working with classmates from the different academic institutions that they've gone to. And so the Hello Tractor, they've probably arguably gotten the most in the last 5-6 years notoriety, but there are a number of other firms that represent, again, a generation of diasporan in the US with a footprint on the continent, building bridges with tech, with capital, bringing human capital to bear. And I think that's going to be a trend. There's a group that now own Essence Magazine. The company that they had is called Sundial. And they came out of the cosmetics business, but what they initially were doing was importing shea butter. And that turned into a $600 to $700 million transaction when they sold, that created wealth both on the continent and in the United States. And so the thing, or the lament for me, is that we don't have more Hello Tractors, but we do have a number of 30, 40-year-old entrepreneurs who are also going about this quite differently. They've seen the Silicon Valley way of trying to develop a business with a team. A number of them are in Nigeria. Some of them are in Kenya and in Ghana as well. And they're putting together pitch decks and going and raising seed capital. So they're not coming bootstrapping as a generation of entrepreneurs who are diasporans have done in the past, or just out of one's own pocket. They're coming looking for opportunity, looking for investors to start, and with the idea that they're looking for scale. So to the point that you ask about what are the opportunities for my fellow panelists to speak, and I jumped into my response without thanking Mel and Janine. This is probably my fourth or so participation, and I always enjoy these conversations because the panelists are illuminating and dynamic. But to me, those programs that Camille talked about, that are the Department of Commerce programs, we have to do a better job, to me, of making sure that our businesses, not just our small businesses, but our larger businesses, are aware of these programs, because I would argue that many are not. You talked about in my introduction that I had gone to Thunderbird. I went to Thunderbird actually to take the course that, I was living in DC at the time, the commercial service professionals were taking, so that I would have full understanding of all the different programs. And what I found is that the farther away you got outside of DC, the less information that many businesses had about this array of programs. One of the things that CD mentioned was supply chain. You didn't stay there long, but why that stuck with me is because one of the ways that minority businesses, and particularly diasporan businesses, could get engaged on the continent in a much greater way would be to be part of the 1,000 or so corporates from the US that do have a footprint on the continent. I've lived in South Africa 22 years now. When I got to South Africa, amazed to find there was about 400 US companies that were on the ground. Kellogg's cornflakes from Michigan, where I grew up, had been here 100 years. We should be thinking about, how do you link diaspora companies to those businesses to give them a consistent market? A lot of the programs that bring you here don't sustain you, so to speak, if you're on the continent, and it takes a long time. Reverend Leon Sullivan used to talk about TTT, things take time. Doing business in Africa takes time. Many of the programs are just too short, provide too little capital for companies to actually plant. But being part of a supplier development program would allow you to do that. So thinking through how do you leverage the AmChams, American Chambers of Commerce, who have footprints in about 15 countries on the continent, get their members to say, I will buy some of what I import for my value chain from diaspora companies. That's a very tangible way to me to move forward. CD talked about Pepsico. One of the companies that Pepsico acquired is Pioneer Foods, which was one of the largest, still one of the largest brands in South Africa. Looking where, there are opportunities, and he did a lot of that at ETF, for newer diasporans, historic diasporans, to, again, work within the Pioneer and work within the Pepsi value chains, because they're huge companies. When I got here to South Africa in '94 for the first time, Pizza Hut was here, which was a Pepsico company, and had been here, and it has out-survived Domino's Pizza, which came in as a rival. And I just don't see a lot of African-American businesses. A company called Anderson DuBose, which is a Ohio-based African-American company on the Black Economic 100. And they came with McDonald's and set up the supply chains for all of the McDonald's. They didn't stay in Africa, but that gave them a taste way back in the early 90s of doing business on the continent. We need more of that. Yeah. So I'll stop there, but the short answer is there's definitely a role for my colleagues to play. There's definitely a growing number of Hello Tractor type enterprises bringing tech, particularly ag tech, and looking at ag fin or finance for ag that is using technology, and that creates opportunity.
Sure. Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. Benji, we're going to move to you. You are the representative on the panel of a thriving development financial institution on the continent, namely the African Finance Corporation, based out of Nigeria. And clearly, the question that arises out of this discussion, one is the AFC in the business of promoting the diaspora as a major force for good on the continent? Michael talked about the lack of financing, the lack of support, at least long-term support to diaspora initiatives such as Hello Tractor. I mean, we can go into the fintech space, recently with some of the other names, which I'll mention later. Can you first tell us what is the AFC? What areas are you focusing on? Do you have a diaspora engagement policy? What is it? And if you don't have one, why? Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And I would also like to join my fellow panelists to say thank you to the CFA for inviting AFC to be part of this conversation. I remember just before COVID, I think it was during the IMF annual meetings, the CFA also organized a series of meetings for us in DC as well as in New York, for us to have some kind of engagement with US investors. So I think, inviting us to this platform is really a very good one, and I'd just like to express our appreciation. AFC, for the benefit of people listening, is one of the newer development finance institutions in Africa. We are Pan-African. We have African countries as member countries. Currently, I believe about 35 or 36 countries have signed up to that treaty. We run a Pan-African mandate. We've invested about maybe $8.5 billion in about 35 African countries. So we started in 2007. So really, we're just about 13, 14 years old. And it's an interesting story. I tell people, when Eric was reading my bio prior to my life in AFC, I worked with Citibank, it's a US bank, obviously. And I tell people when I joined AFC, I obviously never knew I was still being AFC up till now. And the only reason I'm still there is because we're still doing lots of stuff within 14 years to move the dial on the continent. And I think that's important. We try to mobilize African capital, be that whether the capital is on the continent or outside of the continent, and trying to use that for development on the continent. We have an A3 rating, which makes us about maybe the second highest rated entity in Africa, give or take. And as a result of that, we have a global capital market program. So my job as treasurer, obviously, is traveling around the world. I mean, I miss those days before COVID, where I was jumping on the plane almost every other day and meeting investors around the world and talking to them about Africa, the opportunities and all that. And of course, I've done that in the US, you know, Boston, LA, San Fran, New York, or wherever, talking to investors. Our policy is not particularly targeted at diaspora. I mean, I think we have a global investor engagement program, and that program really is to find a way to mobilize global capital to come to work on the continent. We keep talking about the gap on the continent in terms of financing. If you take the power sector, for example, right, you know, almost half of the continent actually don't have steady access to electricity as we speak, not to talk about what's happening in agribusiness, what's happening in healthcare, etc., in the infrastructure space. So for us, we can't do it alone. We need all the capital around the world to come to the continent to join us, obviously, to work. So a lot of what we do is to try to de-risk all these opportunities so that, you know, be it diaspora, be it just any institutional investor sitting anywhere in the world, you know, looking at Africa, you see the opportunities and the risks are properly managed. And that takes me to, you know, the biggest issue. If you ask me, one of the biggest impediments that we have on the continent is the perception issue, the issue around, you know, the perception of risk versus the reality of risk. And, you know, sadly, I think Africa hasn't done well in trying to maybe control the narrative, control the media, and control how people view the continent. And as a result of that, you know, that kind of stops a lot of inflow of investment, even from diaspora. And it also generally creates a perception of risk, which sometimes is elevated. And let me just mention, I mean, I'm sure people will be surprised. We've been in business for 14 years, and our NPL, our non-performing loan ratio, has been, in fact, for 10 years, it was nil, it was zero. And then after that, you know, we've been operating somewhere at around 1%, you know, 1 point something percent. So if you look at that and the perception of risk and the kind of risk premium that investors demand to even look at the continent, you begin to ask yourself, where's the disconnect? And so when I look at an institution like ours, you know, our primary role in mobilizing capital to the continent is changing that perception. You know, we try our best to work with people. You know, we talk to investors all the time. We're constantly on the road, organizing roadshows, being on sessions like this, just talking about the opportunities and how the risk can be mitigated on the continent. So I think for us, that's our strategy. Our strategy is targeted at all, you know, global capital. With respect to diaspora, I would say, you know, we're conscious of how important the diaspora flows are. I think as of 2019, 2020, you know, the flows into Africa was something around 50 billion or something like that. That's quite significant. A lot of countries depend on that to survive. So even in our recruitment, something as minute as our recruitment, we're trying to bring diaspora talent back to the continent, you know, so that we can benefit from the skill and expertise of people who have walked around the world, and, you know, we can all collectively solve the problems on the continent together. So there's so many things we're doing. I will just pause there, mindful of time. Thanks, Eric.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. You know, just a quick comment on, I mean, you mentioned some of the quantum to sort of complete that picture. You know, the World Bank, you know, set the diaspora savings at about 35 to $40 billion. The Nigerian Ministry of Finance was able to raise $300 million oversubscribed, although there are some elements around the details as to you know, as to the diaspora participation, but clearly was a successful operation. Israel has been raising, you know, close to $60 billion by setting up the infrastructure in a regulated environment, the infrastructure for, that are raising money, but also distributing proceeds into various projects around, some of which I've actually seen in Jerusalem. There's a little bit of a heavy lift, but I think it's obviously worth investing. I'd like to switch a little bit, and we've mentioned transactions and transaction support and the various programs that are being led by different agencies, trade being one. Outside of this framework, which sort of Michael alluded to, simply going to Arizona, he was getting less information that he was being in Washington D.C. Outside of the policy framework, there are transactions that are happening. Some of them are happening at an amazing scale. Recently Nigeria, Egypt, soon Ethiopia, obviously South Africa, leading. We've seen, particularly in the fintech space, Flutterwave, Paystack, in Senegal recently last week, Wave. These technologically driven companies led by Diaspora, as Michael said, with a foot back home, but also a foot in the U.S., leveraging their relationships, raising money that is pricing their creation at above $1 billion. My question to Camille is, where's the transactional support around this? I mean, you read their deck, you read their prospectuses, and there's no mention of any sort of support program. Any comment on that?
Thanks so much for that question, Eric. I appreciate it. And it gives me an opportunity to highlight what we at ITA at Commerce's International Trade Administration, where I work, can do, and to also plug some of the work from some of my colleagues at other agencies. So our two key fundamental priorities are to promote U.S. exports and to attract foreign direct investment into the United States, which we do through our Select USA program. And as I had mentioned before, we provide a wide range of export promotion services, through our export assistance centers domestically, or our commercial service teams at our 11 posts in Africa. I would actually just like to highlight for a second that, fintech is something new that we started looking at. We had already been prioritizing some of the sectors that have been mentioned, like agribusiness, energy, health, infrastructure, aerospace and defense, digital. But we just started kind of looking at fintech and how we might sort of position U.S. companies for partnership, with African companies in this space. There are other agencies that specialize a little bit more on that. I think we actually, as the Commerce Department, with our mission to grow the U.S. economy, we cannot directly support non-U.S. companies, but we can facilitate connections and partnerships, as we have done for the past 40 odd years. I also mentioned the Prosper Africa initiative, and under Prosper Africa, they're able to marshal some of the resources alongside what we have to offer on the trade side. For example, from the International Development Finance Corporation, which was formerly known as OPIC, they're an institution that could invest or lend to African businesses that have significant development impacts. Also, as CD already mentioned, his former agency, the African Development Foundation, had seed capital and investment grants that can build capacity to scale up African enterprises. And of course, we have USAID that has been quite active over decades. And they have a development innovation ventures program that also provides grant investments to breakthrough solutions for the toughest development challenges. I hope that we have some links in the chat. If not, we can get this to you later. But the Prosper Africa Virtual Deal Room that I mentioned earlier is an online platform where investors can find companies and projects in Africa to consider. Going back to our Select USA program, we actually did launch a Select USA Tech program that actually helped connect sort of new tech entrepreneurs with angel investors and venture capital. So we are in that space a bit. I agree with you that there is room for future dialogue following this conversation, as we are designing our commercial partnership for Africa. in terms of how, we can marshal our resources along with other agencies working through Prosper Africa to really build that public-private partnership that's necessary to connect people and in order for capital to flow even more freely.
Sure, thank you. We're running out of time, so I'm going to combine two questions, together. The big elephant in the room, which we haven't talked about, is the new African Common Market, the AFCTA, and the implications of the AFCTA, not only for the African economy, but also for trade with the U.S. So my first question to Camille, which I hope you will answer second, is what are you doing in that context? Are there new policies related to leveraging the AFCTA and the implication of the AFCTA? I think that would be one. Number two, to CD Glenn, to Michael, and to Benji. We're seeing the beginning of a major movement around Black household generational wealth building. And in that context, there's a democratization of finance that's taking place in the U.S. with the invention of Robinhood.com as a retail platform that provides retail individual access to private transactions through IPOs and also through the stock market. That raises several questions, for the continent. One, from the AFC perspective, what are you doing to harmonize, the exchanges such that the continent has a single venue for access to investment as opposed to 3 or 4 or 5 that are disconnected. And then number two, this issue of access, household access to capital markets. Is AFC doing anything in that space? And if so, what you're doing? Because clearly there's an opportunity here, again, in this context of generational wealth building for African American families and potentially for African families to have access, to capital markets. So I'll open up this to the last three of you. I'll have Benji answer first, then Camille, then CD and Michael. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Eric. So first, we are a development finance institution, like I mentioned earlier on. And a lot of times when people think about AFC, they're thinking, bridges, ports, and all this big stuff. But we also do have a mandate to develop capital markets. And that's because, if we don't have functional capital markets on the continent, then, that role where the capital market plays, a bit of intermediation between savers and investors will just not function properly. So we do spend a lot of time working with exchanges, working with financial institutions around the continent, trying to develop market access, liquidity, product innovation, etc. And in our own way, we also try to create some of those products, because sometimes, you can talk about, all the diaspora flow that's coming into the continent, but I mean, let's face it, most of those flows come in for consumption, right? To pay school fees and to do little stuff, and not much of that goes into investments. So we need to create the right product and all that. So part of what we are doing is, like I mentioned earlier, on project development, trying to create various kind of transactions. We also try to be a frequent issuer in capital markets ourselves, so that people can actually invest through AFC to get exposure to the continent. If you're looking at the continent through one eye, we are constantly providing lines of credit to financial institutions to support SMEs, so that we can create wealth and hopefully help some of the capital required on the continent. We're working with a lot of the pension funds and all that. We work with governments on policy advice in order to improve the operating environment, ease of doing business, all those little things. And I think that's really where we add value to this discussion around creating a very good environment for capital to flow in.
Sure. It would be helpful if you could put links to those programs in the chat, or at least make them available to CFA for future reference. Camille?
Thanks so much for the question, Eric. As I mentioned, little bit outside of what we do, but we view engaging in trade, quite frankly, as a way of building generational wealth. Commerce Department, we work with companies of all sizes, but realizing that 96 to 98% of all companies in the United States are small or medium size. That's pretty much our bread and butter client. And as was mentioned earlier, we, and I even mentioned it, we're still the best kept secret in international trade. Not enough information is out there, despite the fact that we have over 100 offices in the United States, and the Minority Business Development Agency has offices also across the United States, that not enough information is out there. So I'm actually kind of open to suggestion as, in terms of as we're designing this commercial strategy on ways that we can get information out there, to households in the United States, across the diaspora, amongst African Americans, women, et cetera. How can we get information out there about the tools and resources that are available to them as U.S. taxpayers? I will say that, of course, with trade, one of our key tools, I think, that would be helpful in this scenario is our ability to connect people. We have massive databases of companies, in the United States and in Africa that, would benefit from, the increased connection. Our part of it, of course, would be, to get them, connected with each other, to get them talking about trade, about doing business with each other. And as wealth is generated through trade, of course, trade and investment go hand in hand.
Sure.
It's a cycle. It's a virtuous cycle, I think. You mentioned about the AFCFTA. I'll just kind of quickly respond to that. I've been taking advantage of the fact that, we've been in lockdown on COVID and unable to jump on a plane to do a lot of virtual visits to Africa. Of course, the U.S. Trade Representative would have the lead on engagement with the AFCFTA. We do, however, have an office located in Ghana and an office located, in Ethiopia. And to the extent that we can engage commercially with the Secretariat in Ghana, we're certainly focused on doing that, and even with the AU in Ethiopia, to the extent that we can do that. So, we're the lucky point in time that we are in right now is that we are, in the early stages of forming this commercial engagement strategy. And so, we're open to suggestion, such as fintech, such as, how we kind of build on the trade and investment relationship as we're designing, this partnership, and how can we create a virtuous cycle such that future generations can take part of it.
Sure.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks. And happy to have a sidebar discussion on a few ideas around that.
Yep.
CD?
Hey, Eric, thank you. So 2 minutes for two aspects of this: supporting and scaling African businesses, and then really supporting and generating generational wealth amongst African Americans. So on the supporting and scaling African businesses, PepsiCo in Sub-Saharan Africa, we're headquartered in Cape Town. We have approximately 13,000 employees, 45,000 of indirect suppliers and service providers. Our portfolio consists of global brands: Weetabix, Sasco, Simba, Lay's, Liquid Fruit, 45 production facilities, 70 distribution and warehouse facilities, and we source 1.5 million tons of locally produced maize, raisins, wheat, oats, and potatoes each year. So, Africa is a part of our growing portfolio and an emerging key market for us. It's sort of a watch this space moment for us. PepsiCo entered South Africa in 1999 with the acquisition of Simba. Our operations reflect the strong commitment to South Africa's people, communities, and economy. And in 2020, the US dollar value of our acquisition of Pioneer Foods was $1.7 billion. This is one of the largest deals made by PepsiCo outside the US, which is indicative of how we see the future. And this acquisition of Pioneer Foods is an important part of our strategy, not only to expand in South Africa, but further into Sub-Saharan Africa. So we do scale, we invest, we develop and scale African businesses. As part of our public interest and commitments made on that acquisition, PepsiCo committed over $5.5 billion, which is $300 million in addition of the purchase price, in order to achieve our vision of a thriving business in South Africa and an export center to the rest of Africa. So these investments include modernizing and increasing production capabilities, and adding routes and distribution capabilities, as well as investments in social initiatives. And part of that commitment was supporting a broad-based social economic program that focused on employment, talent development, and, as Michael mentioned, so important, benefiting local suppliers, as well as programs to promote opportunity and growth in South Africa. So we're totally committed to Africa, to scaling African businesses and being a real contributor and provider of more smiles, if you will, throughout the continent with our products and our company capabilities. So that's one thing around scaling African businesses, leading from South Africa. We also have bottlers in throughout the country, but Nigeria and Ethiopia are also key markets, as well as Kenya and Uganda. So that's sort of how we look at the African market and the opportunity, and our investment is sort of proof of our seriousness with that issue. As it relates to creating generational wealth, one of the first things that I always had the privilege of doing when I came on at Pepsico, leading the company's global philanthropic efforts, was to launch an initiative called the Black Restaurant Accelerator Program. And you talk about creating generational wealth. A number of African Americans and people in the African diaspora earn their livelihood in the food and beverage space. And so we launched an initiative to support Black restaurants. This is post the recovery and the redress needed for COVID-19, where Black businesses were impacted more than any other businesses. If you talk about the restaurant industry, 17% of white businesses sort of went out of business during the past 18 months. 44% of Black-owned restaurants out of business. And so we made a commitment, a catalytic commitment to sort of and to put money on the table, but also to draw on others for the support for Black restaurants, which are the bedrock of a lot of African American communities. And we're investing $10 million over the next 5 years in 500 Black restaurants. We're partnering with the National Urban League, and we feel like this investment and this capacity building support to Black-owned businesses and Black-owned restaurants will create, as you mentioned, Eric, that generational wealth that's needed. We also have linked this racial equality journey commitment with our support for educational opportunities, and community colleges, I mentioned, are a key contributor of that, a pipeline to the middle class through education. So getting more young people of color in community colleges and then helping them advance from two-year institutions to 4 years. So this education and investment in restaurants, Black-owned restaurants, investment in education for African-American communities and Hispanic communities throughout the country are two ways that we see PepsiCo and the PepsiCo Foundation being a key contributor to scaling African businesses, but also creating more generational wealth amongst African-Americans here in the US.
Perfect, thank you. Michael, you have the last word, 2 minutes.
Great, thank you. I just want to say, because I'd be remiss if I didn't, that we're working with program, because we talked about AFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, called the Intra-African Trade Fair, which is meant to be kind of the catalytic event for principally trade, but also investment, organized by the Afri-Exim Bank, with the African Union, with the AFTA headquarters, which is in Ghana, in Durban in November. The point that I want to raise is that, because we're involved with coordinating the hosted buyer program, the diaspora in aggregate, so not broken down by sectors, are a target channel, if you will, that we've been tasked to find. So Camille, I'd love to chat with you and find out some of the companies that are in your network. CD, if there's companies that are in your network that you think can do business on the continent, this is a platform for them. I also wanted to say that from a generational wealth standpoint, Eric, I still feel like we need to educate more people about the continent broadly. And I think tools for that are Black media. So Black Enterprise Magazine, I know that Jet has been repurchased recently, Essence Magazine, Black Morning Radio talk shows. You know, we don't really talk about Africa in that space, but that's how you reach more people with some of the resources that the U.S. has that can help. So people aren't aware of Prosper Africa, outside, again, of folks who are in the Beltway, folks who are in the know. So I think that's key. The other body or groups of institutions that we really should be working with are Black professional organizations. So you have the National Black MBA Association, you have Black engineers, Black lawyers. NASP, which is the security professionals, actually started out working with USAID, ended up spinning off an organization that mobilizes capital that's managed by Black fund managers in infrastructure in Africa, kind of a best kept secret. But we could do a lot more than that. And I think those are kind of foundationally, because once people start learning more about what's happening in contemporary Africa, they can see opportunity and they'll start asking about stock exchanges. How can I invest that way? These unicorns that are developing, when they list, how can I get involved? But before and until you have more information broadly, I just don't know that folks are ready. Last thing I wanted to do is just point out some sectors. We talked about agriculture, we talked about healthcare, talked about infrastructure, but one of the fastest moving sectors, which is where African Americans really play a role, is the media. And I'm talking about entertainment. So I'm talking about music. Netflix is making more films on the continent. Animation is happening on the continent. Music is happening on the continent. African Americans artists are all over the continent at different times. They don't always make a fuss, but they're moving in and out. So there's an opportunity in that space. Tourism. CD talked about basketball. Well, the Basketball Africa League has the potential, now that there's a league and games, to organize groups from Atlanta, Detroit, and come on over and watch the game. And at the same time, you'll learn a little bit more about business. You'll learn a little bit more about the culture, and you can take advantage of that. The colleagues in Ghana with the homecoming, African homecoming a couple of years ago, before we had COVID, really leveraged that. They kind of brought Black Hollywood to Ghana and had everybody come into Ghana. And there's still a huge population of African Americans in Ghana, Kenya, South Africa. So, these are some ways, and I think fora like this to kind of publicize what's going on, but we really could have a forum like this monthly to try and reach communities and then focus on, the US is not monolithic. You could do something in Texas that's just on oil and gas. You do something in Michigan that's just on the automotive sector. California, Florida, tourism and tech. That is real. And so, I'm hopeful, and I appreciate that CFA consistently creates platforms. And I just always say, and Mel and Janine know this, we need more. And if we could form a partnership with Camille and Commerce, then it's not like, again, a minority thing. It's an American thing. And we're taking advantage of it. And that's where I think we need to be going.
Sure. Fantastic. Michael, thank you very much. Camille, CD, Benji, this has been a packed 50 minutes or so of information and thought leadership and discovery. And I hope that this is just the beginning of this conversation and potential collaboration. I think, I see interconnectedness between the AFC, between Commerce, between Pepsi, between the Africa group that Michael leads, and also with the CFA. So let's carry this discussion beyond this particular venue and try to make things happy. Again, I want to thank the CFA, Mel and Janine, for organizing this exquisite platform for discussion, and looking forward not only to the follow-up to this, but to other platforms that you create. On that note, we'd like to close out our panel and pass it to Mel and or Janine.
Thank you. Okay. I have the task of closing this out, and there's several things. I was taking so many notes that I don't know where I'm supposed to start. But let me start out by thanking Janine, who's my boss, the chair of CFA. I want to thank Lori Fitzpagato. Lori and I go back scores of years, and we've been very good friends. We've been very good enemies, but we always got the work done. So I have nothing but great things. Erica, thank you very much. You're the consummate professional, and we also go back scores. And I want to thank all of the panelists, for this rich discussion. One thing, one area of that we have not talked about was medical cannabis. And that also has a tremendous impact on Africa. So I want to say that. Secondly, I want to say how thrilled I am that all of these great experts on this panel are of African descent, and every once in a while, it's just good to talk to us. And so I just wanted to to make that. You know, I only wish that we could form a corporation with the people on this panel. Now, I understand that I will be sweeping the floor and mopping the floor. I understand that, that's okay. But the expertise on this call really could make business with Africa a reality. Okay, I want to say that. Fourth, CFA is going to, you know, with Lori, we're going to put together an event in November to honor Ron Brown. And I truly appreciated Jude and Millard, your remembrance of Ron Brown. And I knew him well, you know, I worked with him and that sort of thing. But we have not done what we need to do to support the memory of Ron Brown. So we're thinking about some sort of a gala in November, and you all are part of the executive committee. You know, this is the executive committee for that event, for sure. Bill, you didn't put that picture up. That's right. Let me say tomorrow, we're going to have a meeting with the director for Africa and the Vice President Kamala Harris's office to talk about Biden's-Harris policy toward Africa. And it's a 40-person meeting, and we're going to hear the Biden administration is preparing to announce its policy toward Africa, which is going to be released before the end of the year. And so we're going to be meeting with Jessica Davis-Ba, who is a good friend, and to discuss the policy, what the recommendations are that the Biden administration is going to share for Africa. And they're going to be looking for the input from the African diaspora. So Janine and others from this meeting will also be participating in that meeting, and we'll be sharing some of the outcomes and the recommendations that we would like to see into that policy. So I just really want to say thank you all for a wonderful discussion. And we certainly look for Michael Sudarkis is one of the most brilliant people I know, you know, and I've always said that. And the fact that he's sitting in South Africa, you know, it speaks volumes. We have others around the continent, you know, who are African Americans who live in Africa, you know. Now is the time that we need to pull this together. And let me say this, you got to support CFA. You know, CFA is, you know, we're the last standing institution really out of the Black community here in the U.S. that's still standing. Africare is gone, Trans-Africa is gone. The National Council of Negro Women are limited as to what they do on Africa. All of the group, Washington Office on Africa, Africa Action are gone. We need your help. We absolutely need your help. You guys are the executive committee. What we want to do, you know, we cannot let CFA go that way. And so I'm appealing to you. Stand up, help us out. Call Janine Scott, she's your point person, and let her know how you can help us to build this constituency to support Africa here on the continent and throughout the diaspora. So thank you very much for this enlightening discussion, and we look forward to the follow-up.